Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're stepping way back into the medieval world to uncover the story of one of history's absolute greatest medical detectives. Long before we had modern laboratories or microscopes or even germ theory, there was a pioneering physician whose razor-sharp observational skills practically laid the groundwork for modern experimental medicine. His name was Al-Razi, and what he accomplished over 1,000 years ago is going to completely change how you view the history of healthcare.
Imagine, just for a second, being a doctor in the 9th century. Patients are rushing to you with high fevers, terrifying skin eruptions, and severe pain. But here's the massive problem we have to grapple with. How do you cure a disease if you can't properly identify it? Hold on to that question because it really immerses us in the chaotic reality of medieval medicine. Without a precise diagnosis, treatment isn't medicine, it's just a dangerous guessing game. And that is exactly the central problem our hero set out to solve.
Section 1, the medieval medical mystery. Okay, let's dive right into this and look at what was actually happening in hospitals back then. It was a time when medical knowledge relied heavily on unquestioned traditions rather than active clinical observation.
The stakes here were literally life and death. You see, in the 9th century, these devastating skin-erupting diseases were sweeping through populations. But the medical authorities of the time, who were basically relying blindly on unquestioned dogma from earlier Greek physicians like Galen, dangerously lumped all these deadly plagues together as a single generic ailment. They're treating entirely different illnesses as if they're the exact same thing. And if you prescribe the identical treatment for fundamentally different diseases, you aren't saving lives. You might actually be costing them. Section 2. Meet physician Al-Razi. To solve a mystery of this magnitude, the world needed a totally different kind of thinker, someone who valued evidence over dogma. Enter Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Zakaria Al-Razi, or as he's known in the West, Razis. Born in the Persian city of Ray in 854 CE, Al-Razi wasn't just a physician. He was a polymath, an alchemist, and a philosopher who even dared to deeply critique the received religious and philosophical dogmas of his era. What's super fascinating is that his whole journey into medicine started with just an inquisitive visit to a hospital in Baghdad, where a conversation with an old pharmacist sparked a lifelong obsession. He transitioned from this curious observer to the celebrated chief physician of major hospitals in both Ray and Baghdad, and he was known as a fiercely compassionate clinician, devoted to his patients no matter their wealth or status.
And this next story brilliantly illustrates his entire mindset. When he was tasked with finding the absolute best location for a new hospital in Baghdad, he didn't just guess, and he didn't consult astrology. He designed an experiment. First, he hung pieces of meat in various locations all across the city. Then, he carefully observed the rate of putrefaction over time. Finally, he advised building the hospital in the exact location where the meat decayed the slowest, reasoning that the air there was the healthiest and most sterile. I mean, this is a 9th century doctor literally applying the scientific method. This highly scientific observational approach fueled an incredibly massive career. Al-Razi authored over 200 major manuscripts. 200! Think about that sheer volume for a second. He wrote comprehensively on medicine, pharmacy, and anatomy, diligently recording his clinical observations in a way that had, quite frankly, never been done before.
Section 3. Smallpox versus measles. Let's move to what is arguably his defining discovery and see how this builds his legacy. He published his biggest breakthrough in The Book on Smallpox and Measles, or Kitab al-Jadari wa Hasba. This text is just monumental. It is the oldest reliable account in human history that actually separates these two devastating diseases into distinct, separate diagnoses. For the very first time, a physician actively proved that these were completely different problems requiring completely different treatments. Now, what's really interesting here is exactly how he told them apart, using an early form of differential diagnosis. Al-Razi observed that before a smallpox eruption, patients complained of severe back pain and later developed thick lesions that actually protruded from the skin. Measles, on the other hand, was characterized by extreme distress, anxiety, and even syncope, which is fainting, with red skin macula that stayed completely flat and did not protrude. He mapped out the common signs like fever and cough, sure, but he laser-focused on these specific differences to make his diagnosis. Once he knew exactly what he was dealing with, he deployed a comprehensive, totally tailored management plan. He wasn't just handing out a magic potion, he actively sought to regulate the patient's entire system. He assessed their body type and environment first. He prescribed specific diets, things like barley malt and peeled lentils. And somewhat controversially, he actually disagreed with earlier physicians and used massages and cold water to safely accelerate the fever and force the lesions out, believing this helped the disease pass easier. Plus, he crafted specialized herbal and animal product ointments to safely dry and remove crusts, protecting the eyes and skin from permanent scarring.
Section 4. The Clinical Detective. Now, Al-Razi wasn't just some theorist writing books from an ivory tower. He was right there on the hospital floor, functioning as a relentless clinical detective.
We actually still have his personal clinical notes, perfectly preserved today in the Bodleian Library. Just listen to the way he thinks through a case in his own words. The only thing which prevented me at first from giving it as my definite opinion that the patient was suffering from ulceration of the kidneys was that he had previously suffered from tertian and other mixed types of fever. He goes on in these notes to explain that only after observing pus in the patient's urine and specifically questioning the patient about a feeling of heavy weight in his lower back did he firmly diagnose kidney ulcers. Other doctors had completely missed it. This kind of meticulous evidence-gathering process was totally revolutionary.
And that keen eye for observation, it led to another massive historical first. Al-Razi is widely considered the father of pediatrics. Before him, childhood diseases were just lumped right in with gynecology. But Al-Razi recognized that children's developing bodies required entirely distinct medical approaches. So he wrote a dedicated 24-chapter treatise entirely on children's diseases, covering everything from teething and diarrhea to childhood hydrocephalus.
Section 5. A centuries-long legacy. When you pioneer this much of modern medicine, your influence doesn't just fade away when you pass. It ripples out.
So the crucial point of his monumental influence is captured perfectly in his major surviving works. You have his book on smallpox and measles, establishing epidemiology. You have the Al-Razi, or the Contenance, which is an absolutely massive 23-volume encyclopedia of assembled clinical observations. There's the Kitab al-Mansouri, which broke huge ground in anatomy by describing bones and organs by their actual functions. And of course, his pediatric treatise. These weren't just books, these became the very pillars of global medical education for the next millennium.
To truly grasp his impact, just trace this timeline with me. In the 9th century, he's doing his groundwork in Baghdad and Ray. Fast forward to 1279, and his massive Al-Razi is translated into Latin. By 1395, a 9th century Persian doctor's clinical observations are a core textbook at the Medical College of Paris. And look at the end of the timeline. In 1766, in London, at the absolute height of the Enlightenment, scholars are still publishing his treatise on smallpox to guide contemporary European doctors. His refusal to accept dogma literally dictated European university curriculums hundreds of years after his death.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound thought to close out our explainer. Al-Razi changed the world because he looked at the evidence right in front of him instead of blindly trusting ancient authorities like Galen. So, I leave you with this. If a 9th century physician revolutionized medicine by simply refusing to accept dogma and looking closely at the evidence, what modern dogmas are we failing to question today? Keep questioning, keep observing, and thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the history of medicine.